All right, good morning. This is slide 33. This is where we last left off on our last video. So this is What Have I Become? Slide 35 through I think about 52. It's going to wrap up the remainder of this section, our exploration of molecules, atoms, and the things that either go in us that can help us or the things that go in us that our body uses that can harm us. So let's continue on. Let's keep moving forward. And we end up on slide 37. 37 is an important slide because it gets us thinking about the types of molecules, again, that we put inside ourselves, that we eat. And as you can see, a quick reference of important molecules is just by looking at the nutrition facts. So fat is a type of molecule. We call them lipids. Carbohydrates are very important, and it says carb, referencing the word carb like carbon. But carbohydrates, another important molecule or polymer that we consume, we eat, right? And then we have another one here that we will be talking a lot about, which is protein. Protein molecules or protein polymers, as we'll continue to study and learn about, are essential. We need all of these. We need lipids, we need proteins, we need carbohydrates for different reasons. One reason is, and the one that we most know, is because it can be nutritional. It's things we need to eat. And when we eat them, we're basically bringing in carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen into our bodies. And believe it or not, when we consume any food with the carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen, we're really using them to build other important molecules in our body that are necessary for our life. And you can eat protein to make different proteins in your body. You can eat carbohydrates and use that to potentially make new carbohydrates in your body. As we continue to explore and think about what we eat, we'll continue to look at the molecules and how our body can potentially build or deconstruct or break down different molecules. But think about this. Eating is important, and part of that is that it brings into our bodies all those important atoms we need so that we can put them together like Legos to build important structures or molecules in the body. Slide 38 is an interesting slide. It gives us a chance to kind of think about ways in which our body will make or break chemical bonds. Again, we were talking about the things we eat can be used for energy as we break or digest them, but also to build things in our body. We consume atoms or molecules, and our bodies and at the cell level can really take these things and help build things inside ourselves. Rather than digesting it always, we might actually be able to just build things up and make part of our body as well. So let's take a minute. Let's look at different scenarios here on this slide. And let's see if we can't make a little sense of this. So the activity is to explain A, B, or C using the words chemical bond, which is one of our vocabulary words, is also thinking about how chemical bonds and electrons have a relationship. Here's a kind of a reference back to our earlier notes. This is slide 30, and this gives us a definition for chemical bonding. It says the joining of atoms to form new substances. So a chemical bond is something like between the H and the O, where the nucleus of each atom pulls the other's electrons, which are in the form of this small blue little circles there, close and holds them. So each atom has electrons of some number. Some have more, some have less. And they form the bonds because they want to hold the electrons a little closer to them. Now, there's a lot of different reasons for that, a lot of different ways we can explain how that happens, but let's just remember that general rule. If atoms form a bond, it's because they're attracting and holding closely electrons that are buzzing around the outside. So there's kind of a tug or war between the hydrogen and the oxygen, or between these nitrogen and hydrogens here, where atoms are regularly attracting the electrons closer to their nucleus. And our nucleus is positively charged, and the electrons are negatively charged. And because of that negative and positive, they're attracted to one another, and the nucleus tries its best, the nucleus of the hydrogen and the nucleus of the oxygen try their best to draw the electrons to them. And when that happens, they kind of keep a really close relationship we call a chemical bond. Let's go back to the slide of importance now, thinking about that. So keep that definition of chemical bond in your mind, and remember how electrons are involved also, because you want to be able to talk about that in example A, B, or C. So one of these scenarios you would choose, and you would explain how the situation is happening using the word chemical bonding and electrons. So let's read number A. It says, a single cell has grown and produced two identical cells, or in other words, it's produced. So a single cell will divide, and when it divides, it's basically built a second cell from itself, and then they split apart, and they're clones of each other, basically. But to do that, chemical bonding and electrons would have occurred. But go ahead and summarize this situation as best you can based on what you remember and know about chemical bonding and electrons. We have example B. It says, eating large carbohydrates, which is the pasta, to later be digested for energy. So think about B. It says, image B has someone taking large molecules and breaking them into smaller ones. So if we're digesting, what's happening to those chemical bonds, right? Well, if something's getting broken down and made simple, and we have these large molecular structures, or as I'll be calling polymers, these big molecules, if it's getting digested, something's happened to those chemical bonds to make smaller things. So using the idea of chemical bonding and electrons, you talk about what digestion might mean based on these chemical bonds that form between different atoms. All right, image C, finally it says increasing protein fibers in muscle cells. Muscles increase in size. So you may have noticed when you work out, you get bigger muscles. And so we have these structures like this. This is a good example where you have these proteins inside our muscle cells. And as we work out, you get an increase of these protein molecules or protein polymers inside the muscle cells. And as those build up, well, your muscles increase in size. But can you try your best to summarize what's happening here by talking about chemical bonding and electrons? So what would have to be going on with those molecules for the protein fibers to increase in size and number in the muscle cells? How can you explain that by using the word chemical bonding and electrons? And if you can do this, if you can explain one of these scenarios with the ideas of how electrons are involved in chemical bonding, you'll be doing a fantastic job understanding more of how molecules form and what it means for our body. Like, what are good, important examples of molecules forming or changing, like in example B, in our bodies. All right, that's a tough slide. You may be working in teams, you may work on it on your own. And this YouTube video in the first 10 minutes, or sorry, first minute of it, would be a fantastic opportunity to try to build on what we're learning and maybe have a little fun and get something a little more interesting to hear. Slide 39 is finally our first official introduction to macro polymers. And macro means large or big. And polymer is a large molecule formed by smaller molecules bonding together. So as I use the word polymer, I use it often to describe proteins, nucleic acids, which is like DNA, and even carbohydrates, because these structures can be rather large. The types of carbohydrates we might eat, or the types of proteins in our body, could very easily just be described as polymers. It's not a common word to use, but it's really a large molecule with a repeating structure. So it's very large molecules. This is a perfect example, the enzyme catalase. We'll be learning more about a specific type of protein called enzymes in activities in class as we move forward. This is a perfect example of a repeating molecular structure. You can see it looks the same. It's just a long chain of the same repeating molecular structure. Think of it as a bunch of different molecules bonded together in a chain. Polymer. This right here has taken a big three-dimensional shape, but it is also a repeating structure. If you think and imagine something like this, just folding and curling and squishing together, it can eventually make something like enzyme catalase. What I'm going to recommend now is to think about these two questions in your notebook or in your notes. It says, hypothesize how animals get all the atoms they need to build these huge polymers. So to make these large things like these special proteins called enzymes, or to make nucleic acids or DNA in the body, those atoms have to come from somewhere. Where do you think they come from? How do you think humans get the atoms they need to build these important polymers like enzymes or DNA? That's question number 1. And question number 2 says, watch video and recognize 2 different polymers. Explain their function. So this YouTube video right here, this link, it says start at 9:40, go to protein at 10:45. So basically around 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Watch the video, and as the video gives examples of different polymers, you want to identify at least 2 and explain what the function of each of those polymers is. Good luck. This slide right here, slide 40, this is a good slide just as a review of the types of polymers that are important for us to talk about so that we better understand our bodies and the food we eat and how we keep ourselves healthy, how we keep ourselves active, living and surviving. It says each molecule or polymer below contains carbon. It says each category of molecule below has a unique function in living organisms. We have carbohydrates. Here's many examples of carbs from fruits, vegetables, and grains. Proteins, and this is what we most often think about. When you hear the word protein, you really just think about meat. Well, it just so happens that most of the protein we eat, especially from animals, comes from their muscle cells. And muscle cells are loaded with protein polymers. Lipids are from oils here, and butter has a lot of lipids or fats in it too. And then nucleic acids is what we've referenced, and we'll learn a lot more about in genetics, but this is a repeating structure, if you can't tell, and this double helix repeating pattern, DNA. Definitely a polymer. And we have a YouTube video link here I recommend you watching just to bring a little more life to those macro molecules or polymers that keep us functioning as living organisms. Slide 41 is important. It gives us a chance to finally kind of start digging into the atoms that make a protein and also their functions. So these are the most important functions in our body that proteins help do. And it says, allows movement, speeds up chemical reactions, and they're important for building and repairing the cell. So we have, again, different functions. We have many examples that I want you to use to think about the functions of proteins in the body. Protein isn't just food. Protein isn't just energy. So let's look at this. Any given protein has a different function. So one protein has one function, a different protein has a different one. We have lots of different types of proteins, so they can all be used in different ways in the body. We have proteins that will help with movement, proteins that are good for food energy, proteins that help speed up chemical reactions so we can build or break chemical bonds for our bodies. And then we have proteins that are involved in the structure for cells or body. What you need to do is for 1, 2, 3, and 4, you need to identify which picture here corresponds to one of those options. So in example C, it's hair, and just to give you a hint, you would write C equals and 4, which is structure for cells or body. But for D, A, B, and C, you have to say that D equals which of these functions, and then A, B, and C, or A, B, and E, each of these photos represents which function. So you'd write A equals, and then one of these, B equals, one of these. And of course, when we have our definitions from any of these slides, from 39, 40, and 41, you need to make sure you get the definition in your notebook as well. Lastly, we have enzyme. And enzyme, make sure you get the definition for it in this special type of protein, because we'll be studying a lot more about it.